The Galactic Council had made their decision based on one simple observation: humans were soft, fragile creatures who broke easily and died young. Their females were even weaker, smaller frames, less muscle mass, built for nurturing rather than warfare. When they encountered Earth's delegation, they saw exactly what they expected: a petite young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, barely reaching the shoulder of the smallest council member. What they didn't know was that Maya Chen had spent her 24 years mastering every form of combat known to humanity, and several that weren't. While alien species had evolved single, specialized fighting styles over millennia, humans had the peculiar habit of studying. They were about to learn why humans had a saying: "It's always the quiet ones you have to watch." As the first interspecies combat trials in galactic history were announced, with the winner species claiming territorial rights to 12 contested star systems, the aliens looked at their champions, 7-foot-tall warriors with natural armor and razor claws. Then, they looked at Maya, organizing her notes with delicate fingers. They had no idea they were staring at the embodiment of 10,000 years of human warfare evolution, compressed into one unassuming young woman who had made it her life's work to prove that victory doesn't roar, it whispers. The transport ship Harmony's Edge docked with the Galactic Council station at exactly 0800 Universal Standard Time. Maya Chen stepped onto the polished metal deck, her soft-soled shoes making barely a whisper of sound. Around her, the station hummed with alien conversations, the air thick with translated languages and the sense of a dozen different worlds. She carried a single bag, worn leather that had traveled with her from monastery to academy to battlefield across Earth. Ambassador Rodriguez walked beside her, his nervousness evident in the way he adjusted his collar every few seconds. "Remember, Maya, we're here to observe first. The Council wants to assess all species before the territorial decisions are made. These combat trials are supposed to be ceremonial." Maya nodded, her dark eyes taking in everything around them. The Kytherian delegation towered above everyone else, their exoskeletons clicking as they moved. The Vorth rolled past on their many legs, tentacles gesturing in rapid conversation. The Salaxi moved like liquid mercury, their silver forms shifting between solid and flowing states. Each species had evolved their own form of warfare, perfected over millions of years. "Ceremonial," Maya repeated quietly. "Of course." The council chamber was a massive sphere, with gravity adjusted to accommodate species that walked, crawled, flew, or swam through their environments. Maya found herself in the human observation section, a modest platform that reflected humanity's recent addition to galactic civilization. Below them, the arena floor was being prepared for the first demonstrations. Council Speaker Zorvok, a being that looked like a cross between a praying mantis and a crystal formation, addressed the assembly. "These trials will demonstrate each species' natural capabilities. Victory brings honor, territory, and representation in the War Council that will guide our expansion into disputed sectors." Maya watched as the first demonstrator took the arena floor. Commander Thaklan of the Kytherians stood 9 feet tall, his natural armor plating gleaming under the arena lights. His forearms each ended in claws capable of rending steel, and his movements carried the weight of a species bred for war. The demonstration target was a series of combat drones, each programmed with different fighting styles. Thaklan tore through them like paper. His lower arms wielded energy shields while his upper limbs struck with devastating precision. The watching aliens cheered in their various ways: roars, clicks, whistles, and harmonics that made the air vibrate. "Impressive," Rodriguez murmured. Maya said nothing, but her fingers unconsciously moved through a series of muscle memory exercises she'd learned from her Tai Chi master years ago. She was calculating angles, timing, and weaknesses. The Vorth representative was next. Kesta's 8 legs moved in perfect coordination as she demonstrated their species group combat techniques. Even alone, she fought like a pack, her movements unpredictable and flowing. She wrapped around the drones with surprising speed, her natural toxins disabling electronic systems through specialized contact points. The demonstrations continued for hours. The Salaxi showed their ability to change density and form, becoming weapon or shield as needed. The Helix species demonstrated their telepathic coordination abilities, moving with supernatural synchronization. The Void Dwellers phased in and out of visible space, striking from dimensions the other species couldn't even perceive. Finally, Speaker Zorvok announced, "Now we invite the human delegation to demonstrate their species' combat capabilities." A wave of polite but dismissive attention turned toward the human section. Maya stood slowly, and Ambassador Rodriguez caught her arm. "Maya, you don't have to do this. We can decline, say we're observers only." She looked at him with those quiet dark eyes. "It's fine, Ambassador. They should see what they're dealing with." Maya made her way to the arena floor, aware of the size difference between herself and every other being in the chamber. She wore simple black clothing that allowed for movement, and carried no visible weapons. The watching aliens shifted with what might have been amusement or confusion. The translation systems picked up fragments of conversation. "Is this a juvenile of their species? She appears damaged. Where are her natural weapons? Perhaps this is their diplomatic caste?" Speaker Zorbak addressed her directly. "Human representative, please state your combat classification and specialty." Maya's voice was calm and clear as it echoed through the chamber. "Maya Chen, representing Earth. Combat classification, adaptive. Specialty, all forms." A ripple of confusion went through the audience. Speaker Zorbak's crystalline head tilted. "Please clarify. Which combat form will you demonstrate?" "All of them," Maya said simply. The arena floor reconfigured itself, producing not the standard combat drones, but a variety of opponents. Some were armed, some relied on speed, others on strength. Some fought alone, others moved in coordinated groups. The watching aliens leaned forward with interest. No species had ever attempted to face all the different combat styles in a single demonstration. Maya walked to the center of the arena and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The quiet young woman was still there, but now there was something else, a predator's stillness that made the hair stand up on the necks of species that had never evolved fear responses. The first opponent was a speed-based drone, designed to mimic the Helix fighting style. It moved like lightning, striking from multiple angles in rapid succession. Maya's response was pure Wing Chun. She didn't block the attacks, she redirected them, using the drone's own speed against itself. Her movements were economical, precise, and, when she finally struck back, the drone crumpled like paper. The second opponent was built for strength, mimicking Kytherian combat. Maya shifted her stance to something broader, lower. Judo principles now, but adapted and evolved. When the heavy drone came at her with crushing force, she wasn't there to meet it head-on. Instead, she was below it, lifting and throwing with leverage that turned the drone's weight into a weapon against itself. The third opponent moved like the Vorth, unpredictable and flowing. Maya's response was something that made the watching Vorth delegation sit up in shock. She moved like them, matching their fluid style, but with variations they had never seen. Later, observers would realize she was using capoeira, a human fighting art that emphasized constant movement and deception. But it was the fourth opponent that truly silenced the chamber. This one was designed to mimic the Salaxi's ability to change density and form. Maya couldn't actually alter her physical properties, but she did something that might have been more impressive. She fought like water itself, flowing around attacks, striking from impossible angles, her body seeming to bend and shift in ways that defied anatomy. She was using techniques from Aikido, but also elements of contortion training that allowed her to move in ways that confused even the advanced targeting systems of the drone. The fifth opponent was the real test, a group of coordinated drones mimicking the pack tactics that several species employed. Maya stood in the center as they surrounded her, and, for a moment it looked like she might finally be overwhelmed. Then, she began to move. What happened next was like watching a dance that killed. Maya fought with techniques from every martial art humanity had ever developed, but she transitioned between them so fluidly that they became something new. Boxing combinations flowed into Aikido redirections. Krav Maga brutality melted into the soft circular movements of Bagua. She used Muay Thai elbows and knees, but delivered them with the precise targeting of pressure point fighting. The drones fell around her like wheat before a scythe. But it was the final opponent that truly showcased what made humanity unique. This drone was designed to learn and adapt, incorporating the fighting styles it observed. As it faced Maya, it began to use Kytherian strikes, Vorth flowing movements, Salaxi phase-shifting simulations. Maya smiled for the first time since entering the arena. This was what she had trained for her entire life, an opponent that could use everything. What followed was a combat exhibition unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The drone adapted and evolved, using techniques from multiple species. Maya adapted faster. Every time the drone incorporated a new fighting style, Maya countered not just with the opposite style, but with combinations the drone couldn't predict. She used boxing footwork with Aikido techniques. She applied jiu-jitsu ground fighting while maintaining the distance control of fencing. She struck with the power of karate but the targeting precision of dim mak. The drone grew more aggressive, more complex, incorporating mental programming from warrior species across the galaxy. Maya responded by becoming something that shouldn't have been possible, a single fighter who embodied the combat wisdom of an entire species that had spent 10,000 years studying warfare. When it was over, Maya stood alone in the center of the arena, her breathing barely elevated, her clothes slightly dusty but otherwise unmarked. Around her lay the scattered remains of opponents that had been designed to challenge entire military units. The chamber was silent. Then, Speaker Zorvok spoke, their translated voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe. "This is unprecedented. You have demonstrated mastery of combat styles from multiple species, including some we do not recognize." Maya nodded politely. "Humans are adaptive learners. We study the techniques of others and find ways to improve them." Improve them? The question came from Commander Thaklon, who had descended from the Kytherian section to get a closer look. "Your striking techniques are excellent for direct confrontation, but they leave you vulnerable to redirective forces. The Vorth flow patterns are beautiful, but they rely too heavily on consistent momentum. The Salaxi phase techniques are fascinating, but they require abandoning defensive positions." Maya spoke as if she were discussing academic subjects, not critiquing the martial traditions of species that had conquered star systems. A new voice entered the conversation. "And what makes human techniques superior?" This came from Kesta, the Vorth representative, who had flowed down to arena level. Maya considered the question seriously. "Not superior. Adaptive. We learn from everyone, incorporate what works, discard what doesn't. No single style is perfect, but a fighter who can use all styles." She gestured to the debris around her. The implications were starting to sink in among the watching aliens. This small, seemingly fragile human had just demonstrated that she could fight effectively against any species in the known galaxy. More than that, she could counter their techniques with variations they had never encountered. Ambassador Rodriguez realized that Maya had just fundamentally altered humanity's position in galactic politics. They were no longer the weak newcomers seeking accommodation from older, stronger species. They were the species that could study, learn from, and ultimately defeat any opponent. As Maya walked back toward the human section, her soft-soled shoes still making no sound, she passed clusters of alien delegates who were engaged in urgent, whispered conversations. She caught fragments through the translation systems. Tactical assessment required immediately. Combat protocols need revision. The small ones, they're not what they appear to be. Maya had achieved exactly what she'd intended. Not to win the combat trials that would come later, but to establish that humanity was not the weak species the galaxy had assumed them to be. They were the species that had spent 10,000 years learning how to win wars, and they had produced individuals who embodied that entire brutal education. As she resumed her seat next to Ambassador Rodriguez, Maya folded her hands in her lap and returned to being the quiet young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile. But now the entire Galactic Council knew that beneath that unassuming exterior lay something that could adapt to any combat situation and find a way to victory. The message was clear: underestimate humanity at your own risk. The supposedly weak girl who had just dismantled their best combat scenarios was not an anomaly. She was a preview of what humans could become when they put their minds to the art of war. Speaker Zorvok called for a recess in the proceedings, but Maya knew the real discussions were just beginning. In diplomatic lounges and secure communication channels throughout the station, military advisors were recalculating their assessment of human capabilities. Maya Chen had just announced that humanity had arrived on the galactic stage, and they had brought 10,000 years of warrior tradition with them. The diplomatic quarters buzzed with activity through what passed for night on the station. Maya sat in lotus position on the floor of her assigned room, practicing breathing exercises she had learned from Tibetan monks. Her small travel bag lay open nearby, revealing not the typical diplomat's wardrobe, but carefully maintained weapons and training tools. A wooden practice sword, weighted for strength training. Meditation beads worn smooth by years of use. A small journal filled with sketches and notes about combat techniques from across human history. Ambassador Rodriguez had left her hours ago, still shaking his head in amazement and concern. Maya, what you did down there, it changes everything. I've already received 17 requests for private meetings, and half of them feel like challenges rather than diplomatic inquiries. Maya had nodded calmly. That was the point, Ambassador. Respect comes from strength in this galaxy. We've established that humanity has strength. Now we need to prove we have wisdom to go with it. A soft chime indicated someone at her door. Maya rose fluidly and opened it to find a figure she recognized from the arena demonstrations. Kesta, the Vorth representative, stood in the corridor. Up close, Maya could see the intricate patterns of the alien's natural armor plating, the way her 8 legs distributed weight perfectly for either speed or stability. Maya Chen, Kesta's translated voice carried undertones the universal translator couldn't quite capture. I request a moment of your time. Of course. Please, come in. Maya gestured to the small sitting area her room provided. Kesta flowed into the room with that characteristic Vorth movement, like controlled liquid. I have studied the recordings of your demonstration extensively. Your adaptation of our movement patterns was unprecedented. Maya settled into a chair across from her visitor. Your species has developed remarkable efficiency of motion. But, I noticed you primarily use it for offense. Explain. The flowing movements are beautiful and effective for attack, but they commit you to forward momentum. A defensive application would be more versatile. Maya stood and demonstrated, moving through a series of motions that resembled Kesta's earlier demonstration but reversed, showing how the same techniques could be used to evade and redirect rather than pursue and attack. Kesta watched with what Maya was learning to recognize as the Vorth expression of intense concentration. You comprehend our techniques better than some of our own warriors. This is disturbing. Why disturbing? Because if one human can understand our combat methods so completely after a single observation, what does this mean for the security of our people? Maya sat back down, choosing her words carefully. It means that humans are good students. But, being a good student doesn't make you an enemy. Doesn't it? Kesta's legs shifted position in what Maya realized was a defensive stance. Your species has been in space for less than a century. You have fought no interstellar wars, conquered no alien worlds. Yet you have already produced a warrior who can counter our most guarded techniques. Maya was quiet for a moment, recognizing the fear beneath the Vortha's words. Kesta, may I ask you something about your homeworld? The question seemed to catch the alien off guard. What would you know? Your people evolved from pack hunters, correct? Multiple individuals working together, sharing information, adapting to prey that learned to counter your tactics? Yes. This is common knowledge. Then, you understand adaptation. Your species learned to hunt in groups because individual prey became too dangerous to face alone. You developed flow fighting because rigid tactics could be predicted and countered. Maya leaned forward slightly. Humans adapted differently. We learned to study our opponents until we understood them completely. Then, we developed counters to their counters. Kesta was silent for a long moment. You are saying your species evolved specifically to defeat other species' combat methods. I'm saying we evolved to survive. Sometimes that meant running away. Sometimes it meant hiding. Sometimes it meant learning to fight better than the things trying to kill us. Maya's voice remained calm, but there was something beneath it that made Kesta's legs shift again. The result is the same. You could destroy us. It wasn't a question. Maya shook her head. I could defeat your warriors, yes. But destroying a species requires more than winning fights. It requires wanting to destroy them. Humans don't generally want to destroy our neighbors. Generally? Maya's expression grew serious. We're not saints, Kestha. We've fought plenty of wars among ourselves. But, we've also learned that cooperation usually works better than conquest. That's why we're here talking instead of fighting. Kestha's posture shifted to something Maya interpreted as contemplation. The Council believes these trials will determine territorial rights through symbolic combat. You believe differently. I believe the trials will determine who the other species see as threats and who they see as allies. How we conduct ourselves here will shape human-alien relations for generations. And, how do you intend to conduct yourself? Maya stood and moved to her practice area, picking up the wooden sword. I intend to win, but I also intend to teach. She began a slow kata, movements flowing between different sword traditions. Every technique I demonstrate, I'll explain. Every victory I achieve, I'll show how it could be countered. Knowledge shared is stronger than knowledge hoarded. Kestha watched the demonstration with growing understanding. You seek to make allies by making them stronger. I seek to make allies by proving that humans can be trusted with strength. A warrior who shares their knowledge is less threatening than one who hoards secrets. The Vorth representative was quiet for a long time, watching Maya's practice. Finally, she spoke. There is something you should know. The trials tomorrow will not be as simple as today's demonstrations. Maya's kata continued smoothly, but Kestha could see her attention sharpen. Explain. Several delegations have requested formal challenges. Commander Thaklan of the Kytherians believes you used technological assistance that he was not informed of. The Salaxi delegation claims your movements violate the laws of physics as they understand them. The Helix Collective wants to test your abilities against their telepathic coordination techniques. Maya completed her kata and set the practice sword aside. And, what do you think, Kestha? I think you did exactly what you appeared to do, demonstrate that humans have studied warfare more thoroughly than any species we have encountered. Kestha's legs arranged themselves in what Maya was learning to recognize as a respectful position. I also think that several species are now afraid of what that might mean for their own security. Fear makes people do stupid things. Yes. It also makes them dangerous. Kestha flowed toward the door. Be careful tomorrow, Maya Chen. Some of these challenges may not be as ceremonial as they appear. After the Vorth left, Maya returned to her meditation position on the floor. But, instead of breathing exercises, she began mentally reviewing every combat technique she knew. Not just the ones she had demonstrated, but the thousands of others she had studied over the years. Krav Maga for close-quarters brutality. Systema for adaptation to unexpected situations. Eskrima for weapons work. Silat for ground fighting in confined spaces. Tomorrow's challenges would be different from today's demonstrations. Today had been about showing what humans could do. Tomorrow would be about proving they could do it against opponents who were specifically trying to counter their abilities. Maya opened her journal and began sketching, noting the weaknesses she had observed in each species' representatives. Not out of aggression, but out of necessity. If they wanted to turn this into a real test of combat capabilities, she would meet that challenge. But she would do it in a way that taught rather than humiliated, that built bridges rather than burning them. The next morning brought formal announcements of the challenges. Commander Thaklan issued a traditional Kytherian combat challenge, claiming that Maya's performance had been artificially enhanced and demanding proof of authentic capability. The Salaxi delegation requested a physics demonstration to verify that Maya's movements were within the parameters of natural biological function. Most concerning was the Helix Collective's challenge, a test of individual versus collective combat efficiency. Ambassador Rodriguez was visibly stressed as he briefed Maya over breakfast. The Council is allowing all three challenges, but they're setting specific parameters. No weapons for the Kytherian trial. Sensor monitoring for the Salaxi test. And the Helix challenge. He paused, looking uncomfortable. What about the Helix challenge? You'll be facing 3 of their warriors simultaneously. They're a telepathic species, Maya. They share thoughts, coordinate perfectly, anticipate each other's movements. No human has ever faced coordinated telepathic opponents. Maya sipped her tea thoughtfully. No human has ever had the opportunity. This isn't a learning exercise. These are formal challenges to human combat capability. If you lose. If I lose, then humans are seen as weaker than we appeared yesterday. Our negotiating position collapses, and we end up with whatever territory the other species are willing to give us. Maya finished her tea and stood. But, Ambassador, I'm not going to lose. The arena had been reconfigured for formal challenges. The viewing sections were packed with delegates from dozens of species, all eager to see whether the previous day's demonstration had been an anomaly or a preview. Maya entered through the human delegation entrance, wearing the same simple black clothing as before. The first challenge came from Commander Thaklon. The Kytherian warrior strode onto the arena floor in full formal combat stance, his forearms moving in the ritualistic patterns that preceded formal duels among his people. When he spoke, his translated voice carried the force of a military commander addressing a subordinate. Human Maya Chen, I challenge the authenticity of your demonstrated capabilities. No individual warrior can master the combat techniques of multiple species without artificial enhancement. Prove your abilities in honest combat. Maya walked to the center of the arena. I accept your challenge, Commander Thaklon. What are your proposed terms? Unarmed combat. No technological assistance. Victory by yield or incapacitation. Thaklon's forearms spread wide, displaying the natural weapons that evolution had given his species. Agreed. Maya bowed formally, a gesture she had learned from her Aikido training but which carried respectful undertones in several alien cultures. The watching aliens fell silent as the two fighters faced each other. Thaklon was more than twice Maya's size, with natural armor that could deflect energy weapons and claws that could tear through steel plating. Maya looked like a child facing an armored vehicle. Then, the fight began. Thaklon came in fast and hard, using the Kytherian technique of overwhelming force applied through multiple attack vectors. His upper arms struck while his lower arms defended, creating a wall of armored death moving toward Maya. Maya wasn't there when it arrived. She had slipped to the side using footwork from boxing, but, as Thaklon adjusted his attack, Maya was already inside his reach. What followed was a demonstration of how human martial arts had evolved to deal with larger, stronger opponents. Maya used Thaklon's own momentum against him, redirecting his strikes with Aikido principles while targeting pressure points that existed even on armored species. The Kytherian warrior was skilled and experienced, but he was fighting an opponent who had studied his species' techniques and prepared specifically for this type of encounter. Every time Thaklon attacked, Maya was somewhere else, using techniques the Kytherian had never encountered. She applied jujitsu principles to lock his joints, used capoeira movements to stay mobile around his multiple limbs, and struck with Wing Chun precision at the gaps in his natural armor. The end came suddenly. Maya ducked under a forearmed combination, slipped behind Thaklon, and applied a chokehold that her jujitsu instructors had modified specifically for non-human anatomy. The Kytherian warrior struggled for a moment, then tapped out with one of his lower arms. The arena erupted in alien sounds of amazement and concern. Maya helped Thaklon to his feet and bowed again. You honor me with your skill, Commander. Your people's techniques are formidable. Thaklon stared at her with what might have been respect. How did you know our pressure points? Maya smiled. I studied your people's anatomy and combat footage. Every species has vulnerable points. Humans just make it our business to find them. The second challenge came from the Salaxi delegation. Their representative, a being that looked like animated mercury, flowed onto the arena floor. We question the physical possibility of the movements you demonstrated. Our sensors will monitor your performance to verify natural biological capability. Maya nodded to the sensor arrays that had been positioned around the arena. I welcome the monitoring. You'll find that everything I do is within normal human parameters. The Salaxi challenge was different from Thaklon's direct combat approach. This was about demonstrating impossible movement, proving that Maya's flexibility and flow couldn't be natural. The Salaxi themselves could literally change shape, flowing from solid to liquid states, and they had difficulty believing that a solid form species could move with comparable fluidity. Maya began with basic demonstrations, contortionist movements that allowed her to bend and twist in ways that seemed to violate skeletal structure. Then, she moved into combat applications, showing how those movements could be used defensively and offensively. She flowed around attacks like water, struck from impossible angles, and demonstrated that human flexibility, properly trained, could mimic some of the advantages that naturally shapeshifting species possessed. The sensors confirmed what Maya already knew: everything she was doing was within the biological capabilities of a highly trained human. No artificial enhancement, no hidden technology, just the result of years of training and an understanding of how the human body could be pushed beyond normal limits. But it was the third challenge that truly tested Maya's capabilities. 3 Helix warriors entered the arena simultaneously, their movements already showing the eerie coordination that came from shared consciousness. They moved like a single organism with 3 bodies, anticipating each other's actions perfectly. Maya had faced multiple opponents before, but never ones that shared thoughts. As the fight began, she realized that traditional techniques for dealing with multiple attackers wouldn't work here. Every feint she made, every attempt to isolate one opponent, was countered by the perfect coordination of the other 2. So Maya did something that showcased the true adaptability of human combat thinking. She stopped trying to fight 3 separate opponents and started treating them as a single enemy with 3 component parts. She used techniques from Aikido to redirect their coordinated attacks back at each other. When they adapted to that, she switched to boxing combinations that created openings in their shared defense pattern. When they countered that, she began using their own coordination against them, forcing them into positions where their shared thinking became a limitation rather than an advantage. The fight ended when Maya managed to simultaneously apply submission holds to 2 of the Helix warriors while positioning the third so that they couldn't assist without injuring their companions. The telepathic link that made them so formidable in combat also made them vulnerable to a fighter who could think tactically about group dynamics. As Maya released the holds and helped the Helix warriors to their feet, the arena was completely silent. She had just defeated challenges from 3 different species, each designed to expose what those species believed were the limits of individual combat capability. Maya turned to address the watching aliens. These were excellent challenges. Each one taught me something new about combat and cooperation. I hope they were educational for all of you as well. Speaker Zorvok's translated voice carried a note of something between awe and concern. Maya-chan of Earth, you have demonstrated capabilities that exceed our understanding of individual combat potential. How do we reconcile this with our assessment of human military strength? Maya's answer would shape the future of human-alien relations. You don't judge a species by its warriors, Speaker Zorvok. You judge them by how they use their strength. Today I demonstrated that humans can fight. Tomorrow, let me show you that we prefer to teach, to learn, and to build something better than just another warrior species. The message was clear. Humanity had the capability to be a major military power in the galaxy. But they were offering something different: partnership instead of domination, knowledge sharing instead of conquest. Maya had just proven that humans could win these trials, but, more importantly, she had shown that they might be the kind of allies the galaxy needed. As she left the arena, Maya caught sight of Keston in the Vorth delegation section. The alien's posture suggested approval, and Maya realized she had at least one ally among the watching species. Now she just had to convince the rest of them that strength and wisdom could coexist. 3 days after the challenges, Maya discovered that she had fundamentally misjudged the situation. The revelation came during what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic dinner, when Ambassador Rodriguez pulled her aside with information that changed everything. Maya, we have a problem, Rodriguez whispered as they stood in an alcove overlooking the station's central hub. Intelligence sources indicate that the Council never intended these to be ceremonial trials. Maya set down her cup of the tea-like beverage that passed for refreshment at diplomatic gatherings. Explain. The territorial disputes they mentioned? They're not theoretical. There are 12 star systems with habitable worlds, critical resources, and strategic positioning. The species that prove themselves dominant in these trials will literally divide up those systems. Rodriguez's hands shook slightly as he accessed his datapad. But, Maya, that's not the worst part. What's the worst part? The Council has been watching humanity for longer than they told us. they know about our history, our wars, our nuclear weapons. They're not just assessing our combat capabilities, they're deciding whether we're too dangerous to allow unrestricted expansion into the galaxy. Maya felt something cold settle in her stomach. This is an evaluation for membership or elimination. Intelligence suggests that several species have advocated for preventive measures regarding humanity. They're arguing that a species with our aggressive history and adaptive capabilities represents a long-term threat to galactic stability. Rodriguez looked around nervously. Maya, they might be planning to glass Earth if they decide we're too dangerous. Maya was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications. How long do we have? The formal trials begin tomorrow. 5 days of competition, with each day featuring different types of combat. Individual skills, small unit tactics, strategic thinking, weapon innovation, and... Rodriguez swallowed hard. Total warfare simulation. Who else knows about this? Just me, the intelligence officer who briefed me, and now you. We can't risk word getting back to the council that we know the real stakes. Maya nodded slowly. Then, we continue as planned, but with a different objective. Instead of just proving we can fight, we need to prove that we can be trusted with strength. How do you propose to do that? Maya's expression became thoughtful. By showing them what human warfare actually looks like when we're fighting to protect rather than conquer. The next morning brought the formal opening of the interspecies combat trials. The arena had been expanded and reconfigured into a complex multi-environment space that could simulate different types of combat scenarios. Representatives from 47 different species had gathered to observe, but Maya now understood that only a dozen species were actually competing. The others were here to witness what might be humanity's final examination. The first day focused on individual combat skills, but, unlike the previous challenges, these were fights to actual defeat rather than ceremonial demonstration. Maya found herself facing opponents who were specifically trained to kill rather than simply display technique. Her first opponent was a Void Dweller, one of the species that could phase in and out of normal space. Maya had seen them demonstrate this ability before, but facing it in actual combat was entirely different. The alien could become incorporeal at will, passing through attacks and emerging to strike from impossible angles. Maya had studied footage of Void Dweller combat, but she had never faced an opponent who could literally exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The fight began with the alien disappearing entirely, leaving Maya alone in the center of the arena with no visible target. The attack came from below, the Void Dweller emerging from the arena floor to strike at Maya's legs. Maya's response came from Aikido training. She didn't try to block an attack she couldn't see coming, she maintained constant movement and awareness. When the strike came, she was already moving, turning the alien's attack into a redirection that sent it tumbling back into phase space. What followed was a three-dimensional chess match between someone who could control space and someone who could control time. Maya couldn't see the Void Dweller when it was phased, but she could predict its attacks by understanding the logical targeting patterns any fighter would use. She began moving in ways that seemed random but were actually designed to make the alien's attacks inefficient and predictable. The turning point came when Maya realized that the Void Dweller's phasing ability had a limitation. It could only exist in normal space for brief periods before needing to retreat to recharge. Maya began using techniques from her boxing training to control distance and timing, forcing the alien to emerge at moments when she was ready to counterattack. The fight ended when Maya managed to grab the Void Dweller during one of its brief manifestations and apply a submission hold before it could phase out again. The alien yielded, and Maya realized she had just defeated an opponent that existed partially outside normal reality. The second day brought small unit tactics, and Maya found herself facing her greatest challenge yet. The scenario required her to lead a mixed team of human and alien fighters against opposing forces with superior numbers and equipment. More importantly, this was her chance to demonstrate that humans could work with other species rather than simply dominating them. Maya's team included a Kytherian warrior, 2 Vorth fighters, a Salaxi shapeshifter, and 3 other humans who had been selected for their tactical abilities. The opposing force consisted of 12 fighters from species known for their military coordination. Maya spent the preparation time not planning attack strategies, but learning how to integrate her team's diverse capabilities. She worked with the Kytherian to understand how his armored fighting style could protect the more vulnerable team members. She collaborated with the Vorth fighters to develop fluid movement patterns that could confuse enemy targeting. She discussed with the Salaxi how their shapeshifting abilities could be used for reconnaissance and deception. The actual engagement showcased something that no other species had demonstrated in the trials: true interspecies military cooperation. Maya's team didn't just fight together, they fought as a unified force that was greater than the sum of its parts. The Kytherian provided mobile cover while the Vorth flowed around enemy positions. The Salaxi infiltrated and disrupted enemy communications while the human team members provided tactical coordination. Maya herself moved through the battle like a conductor directing an orchestra, using her knowledge of different fighting styles to position each team member where they could be most effective. When the Kytherian was overwhelmed, Maya used Aikido principles to redirect attacks while he recovered. When the Vorth needed time to set up complex maneuvers, Maya drew enemy attention using boxing combinations and Krav Maga brutality. The victory came not through superior individual skill, but through superior cooperation. Maya's team achieved total tactical victory despite being outnumbered 2-1, and they did it by proving that different species could learn to fight together more effectively than they could fight separately. The third day tested strategic thinking through a complex wargame simulation. Maya found herself commanding forces in a theoretical conflict involving multiple star systems, diverse terrain types, and competing objectives. But what made this test particularly challenging was that she was competing against military strategists from species that had been conducting interstellar warfare for millennia. Maya approached the simulation differently than her competitors. While they focused on traditional conquest strategies, Maya designed campaigns that emphasized defense, resource protection, and minimizing civilian casualties. Her strategic approach showcased something uniquely human: the ability to think about warfare in terms of post-conflict stability and long-term peace rather than just tactical victory. The simulation presented scenarios where the easiest path to victory involved devastating civilian populations or destroying critical infrastructure. Maya consistently chose more difficult approaches that preserved non-military targets, even when doing so required complex tactical maneuvering and higher casualty rates among her own forces. Her opponents initially viewed this as weakness, but, as the simulation progressed, they began to understand the long-term strategic value of Maya's approach. Her territories remained stable after conquest, her civilian populations supported rather than resisted her forces, and her resource base actually grew stronger over time rather than being depleted by rebellion and reconstruction needs. Maya won the strategic simulation not by being more ruthless than her opponents, but by demonstrating that sustainable victory required thinking beyond immediate military objectives. She showed the watching council members that humans understood warfare not just as destruction, but as a tool for building something better. The fourth day brought weapon innovation challenges, and Maya faced her most technically demanding test yet. Each species was required to design and demonstrate new combat technologies using only materials and components available on the station. The expectation was that each species would showcase their particular technological advantages. Maya surprised everyone by focusing not on weapons, but on defensive technologies. Working with the small team of human engineers who had accompanied the delegation, she developed adaptive armor systems that could respond to different types of attacks, communication networks that could coordinate multi-species forces effectively, and medical technologies that could treat injuries from species with radically different biologies. When it came time to demonstrate these innovations, Maya showcased them not through destructive testing, but through collaborative exercises with volunteers from other species. She showed how human-designed armor could protect Vorth fighters from energy weapons while maintaining their mobility. She demonstrated communication systems that could translate not just languages but tactical concepts between species with different military traditions. Most importantly, Maya used the demonstration to highlight humanity's approach to military innovation, developing technologies that made everyone stronger rather than just making enemies dead. She spoke to the watching delegates about human concepts of defensive warfare, protective strategies, and the idea that the best weapons were often the ones that prevented fights rather than winning them. By the end of the fourth day, Maya had demonstrated human capabilities in individual combat, tactical leadership, strategic thinking, and technological innovation. But she had done it in ways that consistently emphasized cooperation, protection, and long-term stability rather than domination and destruction. The watching alien delegates were beginning to understand that humanity represented something new in galactic civilization, a species with the capability for devastating warfare but the wisdom to prefer alternative approaches. But the final day would test whether that wisdom was genuine or just strategic positioning. The total warfare simulation would require Maya to demonstrate human military capabilities when pushed to absolute extremes, when survival itself was at stake. As Maya prepared for the final trial, she knew that the outcome would determine not just humanity's position in galactic civilization, but whether her species would be allowed to survive at all. The Council had set up these trials to answer a fundamental question about humanity: were they a species that could be trusted with power, or were they a threat that needed to be eliminated before they became too dangerous to stop? Maya had 4 days to prove that humans could fight like warriors when necessary, but choose to build like citizens whenever possible. Tomorrow would test whether that proof had been convincing enough to purchase humanity's future among the stars. As she sat in her quarters that evening, reviewing tactical scenarios for the final simulation, Maya realized that she wasn't just fighting for territorial rights or diplomatic positioning. She was fighting for the right of every human being to continue existing in a universe that was still deciding whether humanity deserved to be part of its future. The supposedly weak girl who had mastered every form of combat was about to face the most important fight of her life, not against alien warriors, but against the fear that her own competence had created. Tomorrow, Maya Chen would discover whether showing strength could coexist with demonstrating wisdom, or whether being too good at warfare would be humanity's final mistake. The final day of trials dawned with an atmosphere of tension that Maya could feel throughout the station. The total warfare simulation would be unlike anything that had come before, a complete test of species-level military capability conducted in virtual reality environments so sophisticated they were indistinguishable from actual combat. Maya stood in the briefing chamber alongside the other species representatives, listening as Speaker Zorbak outlined the scenario. The simulation presents a threat to galactic civilization itself. An unknown enemy force with overwhelming technological advantages has begun systematic conquest of inhabited systems. Each participating species will command their full military resources in response to this threat. The chamber's holographic display showed star maps with red zones spreading across multiple sectors. Whatever they were supposed to be fighting was powerful enough to threaten the combined might of galactic civilization. Participants will have access to complete databases of their species' military capabilities, historical strategies, and technological resources, Speaker Zorvok continued. Victory conditions are simple: demonstrate that your species can contribute meaningfully to the defense of galactic civilization. Maya realized this was the ultimate test. Not just of individual capability or tactical thinking, but of how humanity would respond when facing extinction-level threats. The Council wanted to see what humans became when everything was at stake. The simulation pods were arranged in a circle around a central holographic display that would show the progress of all participating species. Maya settled into her pod as technicians connected the neural interface systems that would allow her to command virtual fleets and armies as if they were real. The scenario began with Earth and humanity's colonies under direct assault. Maya found herself commanding not just her personal combat abilities, but the entire military and civilian infrastructure of human civilization. The enemy forces were unlike anything in recorded galactic history: adaptive, overwhelming, and apparently immune to conventional military responses. Maya's first instinct was to study the enemy's patterns, to understand their capabilities and weaknesses the way she had learned to analyze individual opponents. What she discovered was troubling. The enemy adapted to every strategy used against them, incorporated successful tactics from defending species, and seemed to grow stronger with each victory. Around her, the other species were responding with their traditional military approaches. The Kytherians deployed massive armored fleets in direct confrontation. The Vorth used flowing tactics and superior mobility to harass enemy forces. The Salaxi attempted infiltration and sabotage using their shapeshifting abilities. Initially, these approaches showed promise. Each species achieved tactical victories using their specialized advantages. But, as the simulation progressed, the enemy forces adapted to counter each approach. Kytherian armor was penetrated by new weapon types. Vorth mobility was countered by predictive targeting systems. Salaxi infiltration was defeated by advanced detection networks. Maya watched the other species begin to fail one by one, their traditional approaches becoming less effective as the enemy learned to counter them. It was like watching her own combat experiences in reverse. Instead of one adaptive fighter facing multiple specialized opponents, this was multiple specialized defenders facing one adaptive enemy. That's when Maya understood what the simulation was really testing. The Council wanted to see if humanity would fall into the same trap as every other species, relying on specialized approaches that could be studied and countered. Or whether humans would demonstrate their true adaptive nature when everything was at stake. Maya began implementing strategies that no other species had considered. Instead of committing to a single approach, she began constantly shifting human tactical doctrine. When the enemy adapted to traditional space combat, human forces switched to planetary defense systems. When the enemy countered those, humans began using guerrilla warfare techniques adapted for interstellar conflict. But Maya's real breakthrough came when she realized that the enemy's adaptability was actually a weakness. They learned by defeating opposing forces, which meant they required consistent opposition to understand and counter. Maya began implementing strategies specifically designed to deny the enemy learning opportunities. Human forces began using tactics that were deliberately temporary approaches designed to achieve limited objectives and, then, be abandoned before the enemy could adapt to them. Maya coordinated hit-and-run attacks that provided no pattern for the enemy to study. She implemented communication blackouts that prevented the enemy from understanding human tactical thinking. Most importantly, she began using the human talent for studying other species' techniques to coordinate with remaining allied forces. Instead of trying to defeat the enemy directly, Maya focused on learning from the failures of the other species and developing combination strategies that could work around the enemy's adaptive capabilities. She studied how the Kytherian approaches had been countered and developed modified versions that incorporated Vorth mobility principles. She analyzed Salaxi infiltration failures and created new approaches that combined human tactical thinking with alien technological capabilities. What emerged was a type of warfare that none of the individual species had been able to achieve, truly adaptive strategy that could evolve faster than any enemy could learn to counter it. Maya was demonstrating that humanity's greatest military strength wasn't any particular technique or technology, but their ability to learn from others and create new approaches faster than opponents could adapt to them. The turning point in the simulation came when Maya began coordinating with the surviving forces of other species. Instead of each civilization fighting separately, she created integrated command structures that could combine the remaining military capabilities of multiple species into unified resistance movements. Under Maya's coordination, Kytherian heavy assault capabilities were integrated with Vorth mobility and human tactical flexibility. Salaxi infiltration abilities were combined with human intelligence analysis and Kytherian protective technologies. Each species contributed their strengths while human strategic thinking compensated for their individual weaknesses. The enemy forces, which had been successfully adapting to each species' individual approaches, found themselves facing something they couldn't easily counter: a constantly evolving alliance that incorporated the military wisdom of multiple civilizations while being directed by human adaptive strategic thinking. Maya's virtual forces began achieving victories that none of the individual species had been able to accomplish. But, more importantly, they were doing it in ways that preserved civilian populations, maintained infrastructure, and actually strengthened the defended territories rather than just holding them. The simulation reached its climax when Maya's coordinated forces managed to not just halt the enemy advance, but begin pushing them back while simultaneously evacuating civilian populations from contested areas. The enemy's adaptive capabilities were being overwhelmed by the sheer diversity of tactics being employed against them, and their learning algorithms couldn't keep up with strategies that incorporated the combat wisdom of multiple species. When the simulation ended, Maya found herself in command of an alliance that had not only survived the extinction-level threat, but had grown stronger through the process of defending against it. The enemy forces were in retreat, and the defended territories were more unified and better protected than they had been before the crisis began. Maya disconnected from the neural interface and looked around the chamber at the other participants. Several of the alien representatives were staring at her with expressions she was learning to recognize as a mixture of awe and concern. Speaker Zorvok addressed the chamber. The simulation results are unprecedented. The human representative achieved not just species survival, but coalition victory against a threat designed to be unsurvivable. Commander Thaklan spoke from his position among the Kytherian delegation. How did you coordinate our forces more effectively than our own commanders? Maya considered her answer carefully. I studied how each of your species fights, learned from your strengths, and figured out how to compensate for your individual limitations. But, more importantly, I approached this as a survival scenario rather than a conquest scenario. Explain the difference, requested Kestha from the Vorth section. Conquest thinking focuses on defeating enemies. Survival thinking focuses on preserving what matters most and building something stronger for the future. Maya gestured to the holographic displays that still showed the simulation results. When everything is at stake, humans don't just fight to win, we fight to make sure there's something worth winning for. Speaker Zorvok's crystalline form shifted in what Maya had learned was their species' expression of deep contemplation. You demonstrated capabilities that exceed individual species survival. You achieved coalition leadership that resulted in enhanced security for all participants. Maya nodded. That's what humans do. We study, we adapt, we learn from others, and we try to build something better than what we started with. And this is why your species should be trusted with significant territorial allocation and military authority in galactic civilization? The question came from the Helix Collective's representative. Maya's answer would determine humanity's future in galactic civilization. No. This is why our species should be trusted to help build a galactic civilization where military authority isn't the only path to security. The chamber fell silent. Maya had just rejected the premise that strength alone qualified a species for leadership, instead proposing that wisdom and cooperation might be more important than individual capability. You refuse territorial allocation based on combat superiority? Speaker Zorvok's translated voice carried undertones of confusion. Maya stood and addressed the entire chamber. I propose that territorial allocation should be based on each species' ability to contribute to collective security and prosperity. Humans can fight, you've seen that demonstrated. But we'd prefer to teach, to learn, to help build something where fighting becomes the last resort rather than the first response. Commander Thaklan rose from his position. You have demonstrated superior individual combat capability, tactical leadership, strategic thinking, technological innovation, and coalition warfare. By what right do you refuse the dominance those capabilities would grant? Maya's response came from the deepest traditions of human martial arts philosophy. Superior capability creates responsibility, not entitlement. The strongest fighter has the responsibility to protect those who cannot protect themselves. The most skilled warrior has the obligation to prevent fights that don't need to happen. Kestha's voice carried something that might have been approval. You propose strength in service of peace rather than peace through strength. I propose strength that makes peace possible rather than strength that makes war inevitable. Speaker Zorvok consulted with other council members through rapid communication systems that flashed across the chamber's displays. Finally, they addressed Maya directly. The council must deliberate on these results. Your performance exceeds all projections for human military capability, but your responses challenge fundamental assumptions about the relationship between strength and authority in galactic civilization. Maya bowed formally, drawing on her martial arts training for the appropriate gesture of respect. Take whatever time you need, Speaker Zorvok. Humans are patient. We'd rather wait for the right decision than rush to the wrong one. As Maya left the simulation chamber, she knew that she had accomplished something unprecedented in galactic history. She had demonstrated overwhelming military superiority and, then, explicitly rejected the dominance that such superiority traditionally granted. The Council now faced a completely new situation. They had designed the trials to identify the most powerful species and grant them authority over weaker ones. Instead, they had discovered a species that could defeat any opponent but preferred to teach them how to defend themselves. Maya had proven that humans could fight. Now the galaxy would decide whether they could be trusted to choose not to. The council deliberations lasted for 3 days. Maya spent the time in her quarters, maintaining her training routines and studying the cultural databases that the station provided. She practiced forms from Tai Chi, reviewed tactical manuals from human military history, and meditated on the conversations she'd had with representatives from other species. Ambassador Rodriguez visited daily, each time more nervous than the last. The intelligence reports are confusing, he told her on the second day. Half the delegations are arguing for immediate human integration into galactic leadership. The other half are arguing for immediate human isolation to prevent us from becoming too powerful. Maya continued her stretching routine, working through the flexibility exercises that allowed her to move with such fluid adaptability in combat. What about the third option? What third option? The one where they decide humans can be trusted to be partners rather than rulers or prisoners. Maya transitioned into a slow sword kata using her wooden practice blade. The option where they realize that strength and wisdom don't have to be mutually exclusive. Maya, I don't think you understand how unprecedented this situation is. No species has ever demonstrated your level of combat capability and, then, rejected the authority it would grant them. The Council doesn't have protocols for this. Maya completed her kata and set the practice sword aside. Then, maybe it's time for new protocols. On the third day, Speaker Zorbach summoned all delegation leaders to the council chamber for the announcement of their decision. Maya entered wearing her usual simple black clothing, carrying herself with the same quiet confidence that had marked her arrival at the station. But, now the watching aliens looked at her differently. Some with respect, some with wariness, many with curiosity about what this small human represented for their future. Speaker Zorbach's crystalline form reflected the chamber's lights in complex patterns as they addressed the assembly. The trials have concluded. The Council has reached a decision regarding territorial allocation and military authority distribution among member species. The chamber fell silent. Representatives from dozens of species waited to learn how the balance of galactic power would be restructured based on the trial results. The human representative Maya Chen demonstrated combat capabilities that exceed all previous assessments. Individual fighting ability, tactical leadership, strategic thinking, technological innovation, and coalition warfare. In each category, human performance exceeded the highest recorded standards. Murmurs of conversation rippled through the various delegation sections. Maya remained motionless, waiting for the conclusion. By traditional protocols, this performance would grant humanity significant territorial allocation and military authority commensurate with their demonstrated capabilities. Speaker Zorbach paused, their form shifting in what Maya recognized as the Council's expression of significant deliberation. However, the human representative has explicitly rejected authority based solely on superior combat capability. The chamber buzzed with alien sounds of confusion and discussion. Several representatives began speaking simultaneously in their various languages, creating a cacophony that the translation systems struggled to process. Speaker Zorbach raised their appendages for silence. The Council has decided to accept the human proposal. Territorial allocation will be based on species contributions to collective security and prosperity rather than individual combat dominance. Commander Thacklon rose from the Kytherian section. Speaker Zorbach, this sets a dangerous precedent. Military strength has maintained galactic stability for millennia. If we abandon strength-based authority structures, we don't abandon them, Maya interrupted, standing from her position in the human section. We evolve them. Strength remains important, but we use it differently. Speaker Zorbach gestured for Maya to continue. Explain your proposal for the assembled delegations. Maya moved to the center of the chamber, where she could address all the alien representatives directly. Every species here has military capabilities developed over millions of years. You've each mastered different aspects of warfare. The Kytherians excel at direct confrontation, the Vorth at fluid tactics, the Salaxi at infiltration and adaptation. These capabilities shouldn't be abandoned. They should be shared. Shared? The question came from the Helix Collective representative. Humans have spent our entire history learning from others and teaching what we've learned. We propose extending that approach to galactic civilization. Maya gestured to the various delegation sections. Instead of competing for dominance, we create cooperative military academies where each species teaches their specialties to others. Kesta flowed forward from the Vorth section. You propose cross-species military training? I propose cross-species capability development. Kytherian armor techniques could protect Vorth flexibility. Vorth flow fighting could enhance Kytherian tactical options. Salaxi adaptation principles could improve everyone's strategic thinking. Maya's voice carried the same calm confidence she'd shown throughout the trials. Individual species become stronger by learning from others. Collective civilization becomes more secure when everyone benefits from shared knowledge. The chamber erupted in discussion as the implications sank in. What Maya was proposing was revolutionary. Instead of military secrets being hoarded by individual species to maintain competitive advantages, she was suggesting that combat knowledge should be shared to strengthen everyone. Commander Thaklon spoke again. This approach would eliminate the military advantages that each species has developed through evolutionary adaptation. Maya shook her head. It would multiply them. Every species would retain their natural advantages while gaining access to techniques they could never have developed alone. She turned to address Thaklon directly. Your people's armor and multiple limbs give you capabilities that humans could never match. But human tactical flexibility could help you use those advantages more effectively. In return, Kytherian strength training could help humans become better fighters. And what prevents any species from using this shared knowledge to dominate others? The question came from the Void Dweller representative. Maya's answer came from the deepest principles of martial arts philosophy. The same thing that prevents master martial artists from using their skills to dominate untrained civilians. Wisdom. Understanding that strength without responsibility becomes tyranny. Speaker Zorbok's form shifted through several configurations before they spoke. You propose that combat education should include ethical education. I propose that combat education should include strategic education. Real strategy considers long-term consequences, not just immediate victory. Maya gestured to the holographic displays that still showed data from the trials. The most successful military leaders in human history weren't just the ones who won battles. They were the ones who built sustainable peace after the fighting ended. The discussions continued for hours. Representatives raised concerns about security, competitive balance, technological sharing, and cultural integration. Maya answered each question with the same combination of tactical knowledge and philosophical depth that had characterized her performance throughout the trials. Finally, Speaker Zorbok called for formal council deliberation. The human proposal requires modification of fundamental galactic governance protocols. The Council will consider implementation of cooperative military development in place of competitive territorial allocation. The vote, when it came, was closer than Maya had expected but decisive enough to establish precedent. 37 species voted in favor of the cooperative approach, with 8 opposing and 2 abstaining. The galaxy had chosen adaptation over domination. Speaker Zorbok announced the results. Territorial allocation will be based on each species' contributions to collective defense and development programs. Military authority will be shared through interspecies cooperative structures. Combat knowledge will be exchanged through joint training institutions. Maya felt something she hadn't experienced since beginning the trials: relief. Not just for humanity's acceptance into galactic civilization, but for the galaxy's choice to try something better than the traditional cycle of military competition and dominance. Commander Thaklon approached Maya as the assembly began to disperse. Maya Chen, I have a question that has troubled me since our first encounter. Ask it. You demonstrated capability to defeat any opponent, to outthink any strategist, to innovate beyond any existing military tradition. Why give away those advantages? Maya considered the question seriously. Because keeping them to myself would make me powerful. Sharing them makes everyone safer. And, in the long run, everyone being safer makes humanity more secure than humanity being dominant. Thaklon's forearms moved in what Maya had learned was the Kytherian gesture of profound respect. You have taught me something about strength that my people had not considered. I would be honored to learn more about human tactical approaches. And I would be honored to learn more about Kytherian armor techniques. That's how this is supposed to work. Kesta flowed over to join the conversation. The Vorth Collective would also be interested in knowledge exchange. Your demonstration of our movement principles showed us possibilities we had not explored. It showed me possibilities I hadn't explored either. That's the point of sharing, everyone learns something new. Over the following days, as the treaties were drafted and the new cooperative structures were established, Maya found herself in constant demand for discussions with representatives from dozens of species. Everyone wanted to understand how humans had developed such comprehensive combat knowledge, and everyone wanted to contribute their own specialties to the exchange programs. The irony was not lost on Maya that her demonstration of superior fighting ability had resulted in the galaxy choosing not to fight. By proving that humans could win any conflict, she had convinced other species that cooperation was more valuable than competition. Ambassador Rodriguez found her on the observation deck on their final night at the station, watching the stars through the transparent aluminum viewport. "Maya, do you realize what you've accomplished? You fundamentally altered the course of galactic civilization." Maya continued watching the stars. "I've helped galactic civilization remember something it forgot, that the purpose of strength is to protect what matters, not to dominate what doesn't. The history books will remember this as the moment when military competition gave way to cooperative defense. The history books will remember this as the moment when the galaxy chose to grow up." Maya turned away from the viewport. Children fight to prove who's strongest. Adults work together to make everyone stronger. As their transport prepared to leave the station, Maya reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. She had arrived as a demonstration of human combat capability, expected to prove that humanity deserved a place among the warrior species of the galaxy. Instead, she had proven that humanity offered something the galaxy had never seen before, a species that could master warfare but chose to master wisdom. The supposedly weak girl who had mastered every form of combat had discovered that the greatest victory was teaching others that fighting might not be the only path to strength. The Galactic Council stations now hosted the first interspecies military academies in recorded history. Kytherian strength instructors worked alongside Vorth mobility specialists and human tactical theorists. Salaxi adaptation techniques were combined with helix coordination principles and void dweller dimensional combat theory. Maya Chen had entered the trials as humanity's representative in a competition for territorial rights. She left as the architect of a new approach to galactic civilization, one where strength served wisdom instead of wisdom serving strength. The supposedly weak girl had proven that sometimes the strongest thing you can do is choose not to use your strength for yourself, but to share it with others so that everyone becomes stronger together. In a galaxy that had forgotten the difference between power and authority, between domination and leadership, Maya had reminded them that true strength isn't about what you can destroy, it's about what you can build. As Earth grew larger in the viewports of their returning transport, Maya knew that humanity's real test was just beginning. They had gained the respect of galactic civilization not by conquering it, but by offering to help it become better than it was. Now they had to prove they could live up to the standards they had set, that the wisdom they had demonstrated in the trials could guide them through the far more complex challenges of actually building the cooperative future they had proposed. Maya Chen had mastered every form of combat known to humanity. But her greatest victory had been convincing the galaxy that sometimes the best fight is the one you never have to have.